Welcome to the Django project, djblogger. This tutorial is part of a YouTube Django project playlist, which you can access in the video description. You can watch the whole course from the very beginning. If you enjoyed this course and would like all the updated tutorials and associated code samples and more, you can check out this course and other courses this project features at Udemy. The link to the course is in the video description. So in this tutorial, we're going to learn how to, within our Django project, configure environment variables, at least initially in this local environment. And then as we move through the project, and as and when needed, we'll learn how to potentially utilize environment variables in different environments. For us to easily work with our environment variables while we're working in the local environment, we're going to install Python.env. And that's going to give us the tool to be able to set up a .env file in our project. We can add all of our sensitive information inside of that while working locally, and then access it within our Django application. And then when we deploy to our server, we simply need to follow the process for that particular server operating system, how to actually deploy our environment variables within that environment. So things will change slightly as and when we move different environments, but while we're working locally, we're going to be setting up a .env file and storing all of our environment variables inside of there. So let's go back into our application here. I'm just going to clear that. And then let's go ahead and install python.env. So pip install python-env. Okay, so with that installed, let's now start thinking about what we need to do in our project. So in our root directory here, we need to create a new file called .env, and then we need to define what we want to store. So let's go into the settings base file. Let's take a look. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to store the secret key and debug for now. We might want to store more later on in our project, but let's just set this up with these two variables here. Right, so I'm just going to copy that and I'm going to paste it into my .env file down here. And then what I don't need is any double or singles, so I just get rid of that. And then I can remove any white space there. Okay, so we've got two variables here, secret key and debug. So with that in place, we'll just close that. Let's go back here. And now we need to configure our settings file to read from our environment variables. So I'll remove that. And now what we need to do is just import in our resource. So from the package we just installed, also from .env, let's go ahead and import load.env. So what's going to happen is that we're going to essentially call this package and it's going to load up our environment variables from our .env file, and then we can access those environment variables. So we're going to say load.env, so that's going to load up all of our environment variables inside of our .env file, and now we can access them. So let's go into our secret key, remove that, and we need to access them from our operating system. So we need to import OS. That's going to give us the tools to access the environment variables from our particular environment. So back here in secret, we're going to say os.environ, and then we can access our environment variable. So the first environment variable, of course, is secret key. So let's put that in. And then we do the same thing with the debug. Okay, so with that in place, just clear that. If you're on Windows, CLS. If you're on Mac, Control K. So once we get to this point, we need to provide an instruction what we want to do. So os.environ, so we want to inform or instruct to get the secret key, and then also to .get the debug. So also remember that we use double or singles here to reference the secret key and debug environment settings. And that should be it. So let's just check the environment. So the debug should be true because we are in the local development environment. Yep. So let's go back to here. So let's go ahead and run up and down. You can see that I can run previous commands. Let's run the server. And you can see here that the method object is not scriptable. Okay, on line 14. So it doesn't look like we're able to access the secret key at this point. So os.environment.get. Okay, apologies. So we're going to need to utilize, parentheses. Okay, so with that in place, let's give that a go. So let's run now on the server, and there we go. So we're running settings.local at this point. Looks like everything is working okay. Now let's just go into the environment here, and let's just change this to false. So now we're pretending that we're running in production. Now remember what we've done previously. We've set up the manage.py file. If we are going to be running if we're going to run debug false, we're essentially going to be running in production mode, our server in production mode. So let's just see that in action. So in our environment variables, we've set that to false. And let's go back and close the server. Let's run the server again. And this time you can see that we're running the local settings again. So it hasn't changed. It doesn't look like it's picking up the debug option at the moment. Okay, so without getting too technical here, the problem we've got here is that we need to remember that debug is going to be a Boolean. And at the moment, we're returning a string. Now, a non-empty string is going to return true. So this is always going to return true at this point. So what we need to do is then just change this so to match whether we're returning true or false. So remember, the environment variable here will be false or true. So here we're returning true or false ultimately for debug. So at the moment when we return this, we're returning just a string, which is going to always evaluate to true. So we're going to create this clause here. We're going to check to see if this string equals true. If it does equals true, then obviously debug will be true. This whole thing will be true, in which case we're running debug true. If the string returns false, if the environment variable returns false, it doesn't equal true. Therefore, the whole thing here will return false and debug will then be false. Hopefully that makes sense. So let's now make sure that debug is false. So we've returned false there, added false. So we want to run the production settings. So let's go ahead now and run server. And you can now see that now we've made that change. Everything is working okay. We're now running in production. So if we change that back to now true, remember we're returning a string here. Then if we close the server and run the server now, we're now running in our local true. Let me just check that. Oh, sorry. True, lowercase. Then let's try that again, one more time. And there we go. Okay, so now we're running in local. So that's how to set up your environment variables. We could add some more at this point, but like I said, as we run through this course, we'll add and change our environment variables as well as deploy environment variables in different environments. But hopefully that gives you a general overview of what's happening here and how to set up environment variables locally while we're developing our application. So hopefully that just gives you a taster at this point of the idea that any sensitive information within our Django project, we should be placing or should be putting in the environment variables. And like I've said before, that's going to change how we actually apply those environment variables will change depending on what environment we're working within. So for now, we're utilizing a file, a .env file, but later on, like I said, in production, when we deploy our application, we're going to be deploying our environment variables in a slightly different manner. The true value of environment variables will be seen once we actually deploy our application. You'll get a true sense of the real purpose of them at that point. So if you are still a little bit confused as to why we need them, then hopefully at that point we'll have a better idea. But hopefully by scaffolding and introducing this content early, we will have a good foundation in place before we start actually developing our application.